Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ocean Expert Exchange. Scientists in every Florida school and the Anjari Foundation are excited to have you join us for our live webinar events where we talk ocean science and talk with technology experts. So, in this monthly series, we dive into marine science and explore all things that are happening in the field, interesting careers, and more. And today we will be speaking with Matthew Anderson of the Indian River Lagoon Aquatic Preserves. He's part of the Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So, before we get started, I'd like to tell you just quickly a little bit about our program. The Scientist in Every Florida School is a free program. We're housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. And our mission is to engage Florida K-12 teachers and students in cutting edge research that's happening across our state and provide experiences like today with science role models. So we hope that we inspire future stewards of our planet. And our partner, Anjari Foundation, is headquartered in West Palm Beach, Florida. They're a nonprofit that supports and promotes marine science research and education. And many of the foundation's primary initiatives involve their 65-foot research vessel, the RV Anjari. And in case you missed it, any of the information from our previous slides today will remind you that you can use the chat feature to submit questions. We'll get to those and talk with our scientist about them shortly. So at this time, I am going to stop sharing and introduce you to Matthew Anderson. Matthew, you are welcome to take things over from here. Matthew, you're on mute.
Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
That's perfect.
All right. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm super excited to be here and talk about my favorite thing in the world, which are birds and some of the research that we get to do. So, yeah, let's get started on this particular bird. My name's Matthew Anderson, and this is great. So I get to talk about this special bird that I get to do research on, which is called the American oystercatcher. Now, on the screen there, you're going to see a couple big words on there. And this is the one of the few birds that specializes in bivalves. So bivalves are those animals that live in marine and estuarine, right? So like the Indian River Lagoon and Lake Worth Lagoon and Palm Beach, that's that brackish water. And bivalves are those animals that have two shells. So those would be oysters, clams, mussels, and scallops on the West Coast. And this particular bird is the one that is restricted to marine habitats and estuarine habitats. So they're not found in freshwater, they're not found in the woods, and they will be on the beaches, but they're looking specifically for those bivalves, especially oysters, but they'll eat clams and sometimes they'll even eat crabs, and if they can catch shrimp in the oyster reef as well, they'll eat that. And a lot of marine worms as well. I really like to talk about adaptations. And if you notice that bill on that bird, if you've ever been into a restaurant with your friends and family and you've ever had oysters, there'll be someone with a shucking knife that opens those oysters. And that idea was taken from this bird. That's a big old bill, and that's used to actually take out the meat of an oyster. And I'll go into that and how they catch their meal in just a second. Another cool adaptation is on their feet, they have extra padding on the bottom of their feet. If you've ever been around an oyster, they're super, super sharp, right? We as humans can't walk on an oyster reef. This particular bird can walk right on those sharp oysters. And because of the extra padding on their feet, they don't have trouble with cutting up their toes. So specialized bill, specialized toes. They have really, really cool ways to communicate. They have really neat vocalizations, and their most common one is that's where the male and the female, who look identical, the boy and the girl bird look exactly alike. That's how they communicate. And sometimes when one is one on one reef and one's coming in to say hello, they do another vocalization which goes so they use that as their vocalizations that say, "Here, I'm coming in. Let's try to find some oysters together." super fascinating birds. They have a lot of personality, and really enjoyed working with them. So, an oyster, how do you get an oyster? So, this is a picture of some oysters. That one shiny one with the white shiny pearlescence on the inside, that's just half the shell. The other ones are closed, right? And I don't know if you've ever tried to open an oyster, but it takes a lot of work. And so, what these birds can do is do a specialized way of foraging to catch their food. And that is a picture of a bird. This bird is banded, and I'll talk about banding in the research that we do. What they can do behind that bird is an oyster reef. And so they can go out right at a particular tide and wait when the water is just above the oysters. When the oyster's in the water, the oyster is going to be slightly open, just like that. And the oyster is going to be pulling in water to get its food and its oxygen from the water. And so the bird will walk around waiting and looking for an oyster that's open. And that bird can get into the oyster before it can close. And when it gets its bill in that oyster before it can close, it can take that bill and they just go, and they can sever the muscle that allows the oyster to open and close. And without that muscle being able to be used, the oyster is now just wide open and they can scrape all the meat out of the oyster. So they literally just look for an open oyster, put the bill in there, and then they can pull out the meat in a pretty quick motion. Sometimes they'll put the whole head in the water, and you can see them submerged that way. So where do they nest? This is a really important part. So we think of birds nesting in a tree, like a little cardinal, right up in a tree, safe with their parents, right? These birds nest right on the ground. That's their nest right there, just a slight little indentation in the sand or shell area or even rocks. So on the left they usually have one, two, or three eggs. Three eggs is a full house for that particular bird, so it's usually two. Their eggs are about this size. This is my replica we use as dummy eggs. So quite bigger than a chicken egg, highly camouflaged right on the ground. And they both incubate, which means they both spend time sitting on the nest and cooling or warming the egg so the egg can develop, the embryo inside the egg can develop. And they take turns. The male and the female will take shifts, a couple hours incubating while the other one goes off looking for oysters, and then the other one will come in, and that's when they usually vocalize it. It's, oh, I'm tired of incubating. It's your turn now. And then the picture on the right, when these eggs hatch, is quite fascinating. So you see a little stump right here in the middle, right above that, if you could see, real camouflage is one little baby chick. Its head is pushing, its head up, is up against another egg, actually. So its body is kind of left to right is head to body. Super camouflaged. Now, if you think about if you're born on the ground, you better be ready for life. So within 24 hours of hatching of this egg opening and the chick is breaking out of the egg, these chicks are born running. They're born with their eyes open. They're born with feathers already on their body. So within 24 hours, they're running around and they're all over the place on islands and on sandy areas because you're not safe up in a tree. So you have to learn how to quickly be ready to run, and they'll run for cover and they'll run into the mangroves to be safe from predators and such. So born on the ground and born running. So parental care. An adult on the right and a chick that's about 2 weeks old. And so it takes a long time to learn how to. This is a specialized animal. We call it sometimes generalist, which is an animal that'll eat anything like a crow, and then or a gull. And then you have specialists, which are like the American oystercatcher. They're specialized on opening and getting oysters or clams or mussels, and it takes a long time to learn. So the chicks are with their parents for a couple of months before they can learn how to do that. And at first, they bring them the meat of an oyster. Then they'll bring them an oyster that's opened, but with the meat in it. And then later, they'll just follow their parents and they just kind of imitate their parents actually learning how to get the oysters that are under the water. So a long time with their parents. So what do we do for research? What we do is banding. And so we generally catch the young ones at a certain time, right before they can fly, but when their legs are developed. And that's about 30 to 35 days. If we catch them too young, their legs are not ready for the bands. If we catch them too late, when we go and race for them, they're just going to fly off. So they're not flight capable at the point where we try to catch them. So that on the left is a chick that we had caught. How do you catch juvenile oyster catchers? well, on an island or on the sandy beach area, we can literally go to an area where we know they're nesting and they're ready to band, and we can run in there, and the chicks will usually flatten and just think that their camouflage is going to hide them, and we're able to literally grab them, pick them up. Put two bands on. Here's my makeshift leg bands. Oops, upside down. We put two bands that are identical, two red bands that are we can then see later in life as they fly off to begin their life. And we have to, there's no radios or transmitters on these particular birds. We have to rely on people seeing these birds again in the field. And you can see those bands and you can report those bands specific to each individual. So for example, this one is W27 with, let's call her Julie. So there's only one W27 in the world, and then we'll call her Julie, and that gives her a name, and then we can see what her life is like, how long she lives, where does she go when as she's left the nest. We can follow them. We also get to band the adults, which is a little more tricky. On the left is an adult bird that we were able to catch, and that takes on the picture on the right. You'll see two things that look like birds. Those are dummies, and then the one bird is back up and to the left nearest the water. We can put the two dummies on an area where we know they're going to nest before they nest, and we have a little speaker, and we play their calls, and it makes them so irate, mad, and because they think two other adults are in where they're going to nest, so that gets them all just excitable. So when they come in, we have actually, this kind of shows the how fatal monofilament is. We have a little wire mesh type of thing, like a dog kennel type of thing, with monofilament loops on it. And when the bird walks on that to go see what these two intruders are doing, their legs actually get caught in the monofilament. And it sounds really rough, but as soon as they get caught, we're hiding in the mangroves, and we can come run out, grab the bird, put the bands on, take some measurements of the bill and the wings, and boom, we're out of there in less than 10 minutes. So it's a quick process to not disturb the birds too much. It's a little more tricky. So how do we see these birds again to get this information? Well, we rely on, there's a lot of people who like to watch birds, right? So researchers and just bird watchers in general can use these things called spotting scopes, which looks like a telescope, or people with fancy cameras and see these birds with these bright red bands and say, oh, that looks different. And they can take a picture and send it into different websites, and we can use that information. We also use trail cameras as well. These are two little birds. The camera makes a little blinking sound when it goes off. So this is on their nesting ground. So these two birds are curious as to like what's going on. Like we've been seeing that little square box for a couple of days, and now it just made this clicking sound. So we get that information as well from cameras and from other people. We use social media as well to get these reports of these banded birds to see exactly where they're going, how long they live, if they've found another mate to pair up. It takes about 3 years, 3 to 4 years before they grow up and they're able to find a mate to nest. And this is what we get from other people. This is from a researcher who's doing oyster research up in New Smyrna area, and she took this picture of this particular individual. Let's call him George V62, and they have a metal band on them as well. So every time you ban birds, anytime you ban birds at all, you need to put on the federal bands, which you can't see out on the beach or in the oyster reef or in the field, we say, but you have to put that metal band on in case the bird is recaptured, or if once the bird dies, we can use this information. But these bands, the color bands, are used for research purposes in particular, and they're identical on both legs. And where do they go? So this is in a cool little thing. This is a bird. I'll show you a couple of quick maps. So this particular individual, let's call this one George. George V62 was born up here in the Indian River Lagoon in Indian River County. In the first year of its life, it went to the Gulf Coast. This is a state of Florida, right? So we have the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. This bird decided to go to the Gulf of Mexico side for its first year, a little bit more than a year. It stayed over in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's crossing across the state, even though they don't like to fly over land, they like the water. They'll fly over to get to a different body of water. So it spent some time in the Gulf of Mexico, and then came up to the New Smyrna area in Mosquito Lagoon, a little heart there, because in its third year was able to find a mate, is now and is now nesting and has nested in the same area, same specific area, a little tiny island, for the last 3 years. And let's see here. And how about this one? So this is another individual. Let's call her Lucy. X57 was born also in Indian River County. This one went down where you all are, in Palm Beach area. So it went down to the Lake Worth Lagoon, spent some time there. This is as in its first year, right? In its first year, trying to figure things out. Like, am I gonna go off to college? Am I gonna join the military? Or am I gonna get a job? This bird is figuring out life in its first year, first 2 years, really. So went down to Lake Worth Lagoon, Palm Beach County, and then was like, well, let's go down to Miami. So it went down to Miami. And this is all based on other people seeing this bird and taking pictures or seeing it through a scope and reporting this information. Super valuable information to see where the birds go. So this one didn't go to the Gulf of Mexico side. So it's really interesting to find, like, I was Gulf of Mexico, or this one went south, and fascinating. And so this went all the way down to Miami, Dade. And then another individual, let's call this one X56, went to the southwestern part of Florida a couple of times. So it did its cross thing. Well, I like the Atlantic Ocean. Well, maybe I'll go back to the Gulf of Mexico and then back to Atlantic. And so went back and forth. And this bird actually came up into our area in the St. Sebastian River in Indian River County, found a mate, and we thought we was going to nest with, but went with another individual and nested for the nesting season. And then at the end of the nesting season, something interesting happened. The one it nested with disappeared. We never saw that bird again. And then at the end of the nesting season, it was paired up with another individual that was also banded. So we had these two banded birds, and that individual apparently looked like it was adopting the young that the adult had raised, kind of like a step parent, because the other parent had disappeared. So those are the kind of things that are really fun to watch. So those are small migrations. Let's talk about a big one that we've seen. With these birds will go down all the way down to Central and South America. There was our colleagues up in Anastasia and St. Augustine area banded a bird in the summertime, and by the end of that summer, in the fall, that bird made a migration across all the way down to Costa Rica, and not even the Caribbean side, which is closer to us, but ended on the Pacific side of Costa Rica, by the fall. And that's a huge migration, apparently by itself too. So we're not seeing them go on these long migrations with their parents. This is on their own, so they're really figuring out. And here's just a couple of pictures of some colleague researchers in El Salvador in Central America that see oyster catchers as well. So we get banded information of these particular birds in all over Central and South America. So I think I'm going to finish up here. It's just a picture where some of the major colonies of birds from other states in the United States go in the winter, which is Cedar Key on the Gulf of Mexico side, where they group up in huge flocks. We don't see this in the Indian River Lagoon or Lake Worth Lagoon, but this is on the West Coast. And these are birds from Virginia, South Carolina, and Maine, all the oyster catchers that they have will come down here. And they have different colored bands. Each state has different bands. All right. And with that, I think I was only supposed to present for 15 minutes. Let's see here. I will.
That was a
Let's,
perfect amount of time. That's great.
yeah.
Um, Thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing your super interesting research on American oyster catchers with us. We will begin the Q&A portion now, but I do want to encourage everyone who, if you haven't already, please put your questions in the chat box so that we can ask them to Matthew. So we're going to start off with Miss Kite's class in Middleburg, Florida. They ask, what are their lifespans and how long do they live?
Yeah, that's a great question. So birds aren't really long-lived in the wild. It's pretty rough out there, as you imagine. There are other birds that will eat them. In typical of all animals, all wildlife, marine life and wildlife, terrestrial wildlife. Their first couple of years it's hard to live for your first couple of years. So oyster catchers, I think the longest lived oyster catcher is about 14 years old. But we're seeing lifespans, typically of 7, 8, 9, 9 years, which is a pretty good life. Just based on, well, imagine all the migration that you have to do and all the elements that are against you with wind and weather and predators. So yeah, if you live to be 10 years old as this particular bird, that's a good life. Yeah.
And somewhat related to that, what are the oyster catcher's natural predators?
Yeah, we've seen so once when they're sitting on their nest incubating, they're quite vulnerable. They're out there, one at a time. You might have the other mate standing guards, but things will come in. Foxes. We've seen bobcats on the oyster reef up in Mosquito Lagoon. Fox, bobcat, and especially birds of prey. So the bald eagle will predate upon them. When they migrate, peregrine falcons will also predate on them quite successfully because they're such good predators. So those are two big. And then we have a couple of hawks here that will also try and predate on them. Red-tailed hawks and then red-shouldered. That's more like Cooper's hawks. So hawks, eagles, fox, and bobcats are probably the big ones as adults. Now, as young, when they're eggs, things will come and scare the parents off the eggs. So a lot of different birds, even great blue herons, and night herons will eat the eggs. Raccoons will eat the eggs, and raccoons will also eat the chicks. So they have quite a few predators out there. They're pretty tough birds, though. Um, they will try to defend. I've seen them. I've seen vultures come in, and of course, vultures won't actively predate on them, but vultures will come in close. And I've seen oyster catchers, a bird that a quarter of its size, chase them off, and I've seen them chase off great blue herons. So they're really good parents in defending their young to the best that they can.
Right. And do tides wash away the egg nests before they hatch since they're right on the ground there?
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up and a great question. Yeah, quite commonly. So, you talk about global climate change and sea level rise. We've lost a lot of the nesting areas. What used to be a nice, safe, dry area to nest on with sea level rise. We've had areas that were able to um, for the birds to use as a nesting ground that are no longer there at all. And we've seen many nesting areas go away. And wind events and wind storm events, they're pretty good in the rain. It's fascinating. You have to do this incubation and sit on your egg for 24 hours a day for almost a month. And they do that just, uh, they're so dedicated. They do it. And it's just such a joy to watch. But um, they can they're really good, pretty good pretty good at judging the water lines. So they'll take the area that's dry and really dried out of shell area or sand and see the water where it's wet, and they'll use that as a cue and nest in that high and dry area, which is safe. But with storm events, sometimes, yeah, we call that overwash or washout, and that's probably second to human disturbance as a number one cause. I'd say it's human disturbance, predation, and overwash is the number one factor of egg mortality. Yeah.
Okay. And several folks are wondering how big oyster catchers can get when they're full grown. What's their weight, wingspan, beak length, etc.
Yeah. So think of about the size of a skinny chicken. So I could do some measurements here, and I don't know their actual wing lengths, but yeah, they're really kind of a fit chicken-sized bird. Yep,
Is that with their beak included or before you
oh
add
yeah,
that?
good point. Yeah, no, so their beak is three times the size of their head. So you got a little head, and then their bill's out to here. Yeah, so yeah, it's like a skinny fit chicken with an extra long bill, and
Okay.
they're long-legged as well.
Mm,
So it's like a chicken like a chicken on skinny chicken on stilts.
okay. Um, so slight turn of a question here. How do you see the band writing to report it? They seem so tiny, and if you don't have a
Yeah.
special camera, how do you're supposed to see this so you can report it?
Yeah, it's pretty tough. Some bands are, the bigger the bird, the bigger the band. This
Mm,
particular bird, you can't even do with binoculars. So you do have to have what's called a spotting scope, and that's about two or three times the power of a pair of binoculars. So yeah, you have to have a spotting scope. But now folks have pretty fancy cameras with telephoto lens, so they can look in that and focus and take a snapshot. But you do have to have those two versions of specialized equipment to be able to get the band reading, and it does take some skill, some calm weather, with the wind blowing, it is kind of tough and get it into focus. But it's if you know what you're doing with a little training, it's not too bad, but you really need a spotting scope or a camera to get that. And yeah, we try to make it as easy as possible, especially with the two bands, because birds will often put one foot up when they're resting to thermoregulate. And so even if we just get one foot down with this particular species, the oyster catcher, we know it's the same band code. So if we get one leg, we're good. So
That's
it is.
great. And Miss Allison's class in Port Charlotte, Florida, is wondering if there's a database where people can report seeing the birds.
Sure.
And related to that, is that data publicly accessible? Excuse me.
Yeah, so this is the best place. I think I probably had it on my last slide is the which is we bird folks we like to use a four-letter code. So it's the AMO AMOY, which is the American Oystercatcher Working Group. So you can Google American Oystercatcher Working Group, and that will give you a website for reporting information, these banded birds wherever you see them in the state of Florida or outside the state of Florida. Yeah, there it is, right there, amoyworkinggroup.org. And yeah, it really just takes enter in your email, and you can get information on different birds that are coming into Florida and all kinds of cool stuff. And if you're a portable bird, they give you you have a profile on the website, and so you can see the bird that you reported. You can see where it was born and other places that it's been, and all kinds of movements on the bird that you've now kind of become friends with. So that's pretty fun. But that's a website to use, and that's the easiest, friendliest one to do. There's another one with the federal government, but it's hard to get information back. But the Amway Working Group is great, and you can see whether people's birds have been banded. And like I said, there's different colors too. The state of Florida is using red, but we have North Carolina birds that have a black band with a white code. There's green bands with white codes from Virginia, and then New Jersey, Massachusetts all have different codes. And a lot of those birds come down to Florida in the winter. So, but that's the best place.
Great. And somewhat related to that, what is their range geographically? Are they in any other countries around the world or just in the Americas?
Yeah, that's a really cool question too. And I like there's a really great website if you're getting into birds called the Birds of North America, and that's the Cornell Lab. And they are the ones who run this program called eBird. And eBird, and that's a really fun backyard project too, or even a schoolyard project is eBird. And they do a project called Project Feeder Watch, and all kinds of cool programs. Yeah, the Cornell Laboratory for Ornithology is Birds of North America. It's an eBird. That is super fascinating, really great for students and school groups. You can make a backyard bird list of this birds that you see in your schoolyard with your teacher and stuff. That is a good, so you can type in American oyster catcher and you can see its range. And so we work with the American Oyster Catcher Working Group. And so the birds that we focus on, these are people just like myself from Maine all the way down to Florida, around into the Gulf of Mexico, Maine to Texas is what we're focused on with this particular species. However, this particular species is also found in Baja, Mexico, in southern Mexico. And in its range, they're also found in the Caribbean, and they're also found in Central America and all the way down to Peru, Chile, and they also will migrate to Venezuela and Colombia. So this particular species has quite a range. Now we have other oyster catchers that are not the American oyster catchers throughout the world. There's quite a few, a handful, less than about 10 species around the world, and they do fascinating different things than our particular American oyster catcher. But long answer is the New World in America. So let's say, North America all the way down to South America is where this particular same species is found. Mhm.
Great. Miss Caffey's marine science class in Port Charlotte asks about the adoption case that you mentioned. Do you see other examples of this with oyster catchers as well, or was this a unique case?
Yeah, it's a unique case, and thanks for bringing that up. I should have mentioned before that it is unique. So we call what birds particularly like to do is you find a mate and you raise a family, and if that goes well, like your eggs hatch, your chick grows up, and your chick flies off and begins life after those 3 months. That's a successful nesting season. So that worked really well for that particular pair. Let's say George and Julie. So George and Julie last year did that, and they raised this one chick or two chicks, sometimes three. If that happens, what they'll do is they'll go back to the same nesting area for the spring and summer and do it all over again. So it's just repeating what is successful. And that's the pattern in most birds, and in this particular bird as well. So what worked last year, everything's just, they're good parents together, what have you, and they're raising a chick, and that's what we call nesting success. So they'll keep doing that. Now, what happened that is rare in this particular bird, and we're able to see that in banded and unbanded bird, is that when you find your mate and then you're nesting, we see that okay, they're there together, they raise that chick, and this was a unique case in where we were able to know that it was the a bird with bands and the bird without bands raising this chick, and all of a sudden it was after the nesting season is when we saw the parent with the band, now with the banded bird and with the chick that the one individual had raised. And so it because we never saw that unbanded bird again, we assumed that there was probably mortality, something happened to the parent, and something, probably had been eaten. And so it had paired up with another bird to help raise that chick most likely because the chick was still needed help. It was about a month before the chick could fly off and figure out life on its own. So it paired up with another bird, but that's a rare case. Usually they're there and that's yeah. So and switching during the nesting season, is we haven't really seen that either. So and other countries, speaking of research, in Chile, in Peru and Chile, we've actually seen pairs where a female here on this nest and a female here on this nest, and then you have a male that will help both the females raising both of those chicks in incubating and helping those chicks. So it's a little bit of cooperation, if you want to call it that, amongst individuals as well. But for generally, the pattern is you find a mate, you stick with that mate for the nesting season. If it works, then you continue, and that can happen like what for 10 years. We've seen birds do that 8 years in a row. Mhm.
Oh, wow. Miss Tish's group asked if they like to sit and float on the water like ducks.
That's yeah. No, but that's a really good point and question as well. So they're not swimmers on like a duck. They're like I saw that it showed you that first picture where they're walking in the water. So they'll walk in the water and look for an open oyster and eat it, but they don't float. They walk in the water, and then they walk really well on land. They fly very well. But something you talk about science and biology, that is what we call innate ability, which means you're born with it. Your parents don't actually teach it. When we go to catch the little ones, the little juveniles, we go running up on the island. The parents just fly off and fly over and get all mad. And on good days, if we have two chicks we're looking for, that both the chicks will go into the bushes and flatten and hide, and we can pick it up. And then the other one will do that, and we have them both. But this bird innately, it has the ability, and it just knows and in the egg, and when it's born, sometimes they'll run to the water and they'll dive. And they've never been taught that. They've never seen, and their parents do not do that. They'll just run to the water and they'll dive to the bottom. And this gets it makes it a little scarier for us because we don't want the birds to get too wet or cold. But they'll dive like the little scuba divers and just hang out for as long as they can hold their breath, and then they'll come popping back up, and we're like, oh, there it is on the top of the water. So yeah, yeah, it's pretty fascinating to
Yeah.
know that the bird that's just like well, innate response to trying to stay safe. So no duck-like, but a little bit of scuba action.
Um, Zoe asks, why are their legs pink and their eyes orange yellow? Are these adaptations?
Yeah, that's a good one too. So as far as we can understand, I think about animals and I think about what we know as biologists and through my training through the years of what I thought I knew and what we're knowing about science, it's all changing and broadening and we're learning so much more about communication and sensory adaptations and what animals use as their senses. I mean, we talk about an extra sense in humans, the sixth sense of, not just touch, taste, and hearing and seeing, right? But other senses. And scientists are now establishing that humans rely on so much more senses than even our five senses. And so now there's research on animals that are showing that they're using so many other cues and or other ways to figure things out, other senses, either with their mind, their body, and all the connectivity, the gut instinct, and yeah. So for us, from what we understand, the colorations of this particular bird is simply used as a sign that the bird is fully at the age of where it could find a mate. So when they're young, you notice that their bill is a little bit different and their legs aren't as bright. Their bills actually, when they're young, is orange with a dark tip. So it gives a visual cue of when you come into full breeding nesting plumage, when your bill is bright red and your legs are orange and your coloration is very distinct. That's a cue for other adults that are ready to be parents to say like, okay, this is an individual that is ready to be a parent. So that's a visual cue, most likely with the legs and the coloration around their eyes and such that is not used for any kind of an adaptation. It's simply an idea of I'm an adult, so we can go find a nesting area together. Yeah. So
Okay. Miss Allison's class is wondering how much oyster catchers can eat each day. And you mentioned earlier that they eat oysters, but they also eat other types of things. Do they like if the choice is there, do they go for the oyster every time?
yeah, oh, that's a good one. I'm sure there's probably research. Yeah, there is research on that. I can't remember the results of research on prey preferences.
Mm,
So, you could do. I mean, it's been done where you have an oyster reef with oyster availability, maybe and mussels will grow along with the oysters. So often you'll have oysters in a clump and then a mussel here. So you could look at that and they have done that and see what the prey preference is over a year of watching birds over and over and over again and seeing what they're picking when they have options, right? So you could have availability of these small oyster crabs and mud crabs that are in the oysters and mussels, and then the oysters themselves to see that. So it really and it kind instead of on a particularly preference. It's usually about availability. So if you're in an area and it's not coincidental, it really where there's oysters, they're feeding on oysters. Now in migration, they might move to an area where there's less oysters. And so it really is on what is there and what's available. So it seems to be that if oysters are available, it's going to be their food of choice. I just saw last week a couple of oyster catchers on a sandbar, and they were probing with their bills in the sand looking for worms, and that there weren't oysters there. I've also seen uh, oyster catchers bring mussels and mussel meat to their young, and so it takes a lot. They do eat a lot. They're not like reptiles where they can not eat like an alligator or a snake where they can not eat for a couple of weeks and because they do have a pretty high metabolism being warm-blooded. So you need to eat. And I don't know what the pounds per day are of oysters, but it's quite a bit. So the average when they have chicks and the chicks are waiting for them to bring home the oyster meat, the parent will stay with the chick or chicks, let's say. So there's two chicks and one parent. The one parent will stay and watch guard while the other one goes off to find an oyster. It's about every 15 minutes during the daylight hours. At night, they're sleeping. They're not, they're just hanging out. But during the day, it can be about every 15 minutes. A parent's going out to a different area, and this could be a mile away, or it could be, a couple hundred meters, going out every 15 minutes and bringing back an oyster to those chicks. Sometimes they get full. I've seen them plop an oyster down in front of the chicks, and the chicks just look at them like, not even think to oyster meat. And the parents like, what? I just brought you that. So it's quite labor intensive, but they need to eat, throughout the day, consisting both the parents and the chicks.
Miss Caffey has a student asking that, as you said earlier, oyster catchers are specialists and they need to be taught how to hunt for their food. Could we perhaps generalize and say that their innate behavior is more frequently as generalists?
What was the last part there? There.
It's asking if you can generalize about innate behavior versus being taught on generalist or specialist birds.
Right. Well, I will say with bird behavior, it's a lot of just figuring it out, whether you're a generalist or you're a specialist. Just the feeding behavior just takes a lot of trial and error. Let's take even in practice, let's take like a pelican. So I do a lot of research on pelicans too, and I've seen young pelicans take sticks and throw them in the air and have them land to another area and go get them, almost like practicing how to catch a fish. And it looks playful, but they're most likely learning how to catch things with their bill and just flinging sticks around. So that's trial and error. And even with young generalists, it really is the behavior that is innate is kind of this hunt and peck type of thing. Like, well, I'm just gonna peck at things until I find something I like, or um, and then see if that works. And then that happens in specialists as well. And that trial and error also is seen with the specialist of the American oyster catcher in that when the parents are walking around, the parents, I've seen a chick with their two parents and they're walking, the parents are getting the oysters, they're putting their bill in there, they're cutting the muscle so they can pull out the oyster meat. And the chick is usually behind there and they're following, they're pecking at like shell. And they're pecking at closed oyster and just like and it takes them on. It's kind of cute to watch because they're pecking and it's like a rock, they're not gonna be able to open that. And the parents will do that and they're eating their oysters. And eventually, after 15 minutes to 30 minutes, they just look back and they see their young one just pecking at rocks and not figuring it out. And they'll give them an oyster that they had opened and stuff. And then and they've watched. It's a lot of visual observation with these chicks, and they're watching and they're seeing like, and it one day it just like clicks. They watch their parents just slide that bill in, and then they're like, oh, I guess that's how it works. You have to get your bill in there before it closes. And
Right.
so yeah, between trial and I think I had the question, between generalists and specialists, there's an innate behavior to just really figure it out and try to hunt and peck and see what works in both. But I would say the ability for specialists, the learning curve is longer because you're not like, for example, the oyster catcher is not going to be at the beach begging for some potato chips. The oyster catcher's not going to go and dive in the water for a fish, and the bird, so their availability of what they can eat is so limited that the parental care is going to take longer, and that learning curve is going to take longer in specialists and generalists. Another bird this bird called a snail kite. If you're a snail kite, you're just eating these snails and you're not eating anything else. So that's a specialist, right? And so that specialized behavior is learned, and it takes longer to learn that because the bird actually has to get into the round snail, and so it takes longer for the chicks to figure that out. So the learning curve is longer in specialists. Sure.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Um, also for Miss Tish's class. They would like to know how long you've been studying oyster catchers and what inspired you to get into this work. And do you have any recommendations for classes or experiences for those considering similar research?
Yeah, so I've been working with oyster catchers now for 12 years, and I before that I'd studied birds in different parts of the United States, and I spent a long time in other countries. I got to work with tropical birds in Central and South America, so I've been fascinated with birds. They're really near and dear to my heart. I communicate with them and whistle and all that kinds of stuff, so it's just so special. Uh, and then I was in my current job, I was sent to do research on oysters, and I've done that. And then all of a sudden, I was the research on oyster catchers wasn't there, it wasn't information and data being taken on those. So I just combined that previous bird experience with being able to study this bird and oysters and combine the two, which is super, super fascinating. Yeah, I think the research on birds is super important, but I really also want to highly emphasize the ability to just have opportunities to spend time with birds, whether it's in the schoolyard or in your families, in any space, in any parks. It's really a neat experience because it's easy to do. You don't even have to have specialized binoculars, but just spending time with birds and giving them your attention is a really, really unique opportunity. And sometimes we spend so much time identifying and making lists of what we've seen, but sometimes being able to go out and listen to the songs and the calls can really, really be uplifting for any school kids or kids and adults. So it doesn't have to be research based. But another a cool way is to get out, if you wanted to with students is working with eBird and making perhaps the backyard bird count for your schoolyard is a really good thing. Your local Audubon chapter, going on bird hikes with them can be quite nice. I really wish, and particularly even in my region, that there were more young folks getting into bird watching. Unfortunately, it's usually older aged folks doing that, but we'd really like to incorporate younger and enthused minds to do bird watching, and that can get you involved with bird research too.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie, who will say our conclusions and final thank yous. But it was lovely to talk with you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. A very special thank you to Matthew Anderson. Fascinating work on oyster catchers. And I also appreciate, and I know the teachers do too, a number of the resources and classroom ideas that you presented. So again, thank you for that. A recording of today's session has been made available through the UF Earth Systems YouTube channel. You can find that recording there. For more information about our programs, The Scientist in Every Florida School and the Injury Foundation, you can visit our websites and follow us on social media. And we've got one final upcoming event for the spring, and that will be on April 1st. We will be joined by Alexa Elliott of South Florida PBS, who will be sharing how the Emmy winning Changing Seas marine science documentary series was produced from start to finish. So this is a very interesting take on marine science and marine science-based careers that we hope you'll be joining us for. So in the meantime, on behalf of the Scientist in Every Florida School program and the Injury Foundation, we once again want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on future Ocean Expert Exchanges. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.